Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar. This will be an overview of Community's new loudspeaker design reference guides. My name is Dave Howden, and I'm Director of Technical Services. In today's webinar, we will be covering our recently released design reference guides and also be reviewing some of the examples which we have produced in easeFocus 3 format templates. Our presenter today is John Lufik, who is Technical Services Manager for the Technical Applications Group, also known as the TAG team. So the Technical Applications Group, quick word about us. We are the people that review project designs, offer product suggestions and recommendations, and a number of just general information on technical topics to help you achieve successful results using community loudspeaker systems. Please feel free to reach out to TAG for tech and application support at any time. Before we get started, the 3 design guides are available in the GoToMeeting toolbox down in the handout section. Also, the easeFocus design templates will be sent to all participants of this webinar after the webinar ends, plus bonus site survey PDF worksheets to make your life a little bit easier in the field when visiting these rooms, which you may need support on. And lastly, please type your questions in the GoToMeeting chat box as we go along. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we hope to get to as many questions as possible. With that said, let's get started. Over to John Lufik.
Thanks, Dave. So you got your handouts. You might want to keep them handy, but mainly if you just follow what's on screen, we're going to be jumping in and out of different applications, and you can just follow that. Template files will come later as a follow-up because it's a big download, and please do put your questions in. Dave will keep an eye on those, address what he can right away, and other things that are good for the session he'll highlight. This is a quick overview, if you will, of where we're going to go today in the next hour, and we're going to cover each of the 3 design guides, one on sports sound systems, most of them outdoor, some of them indoor, presentation and performance spaces, houses of worship. So 3 different guides. And then we'll talk about where to get your template files and data files and software and all that for easeFocus, which directly supports all 3 of those. And we have some site survey worksheets that have been available to reps for quite a while, and I'm not sure everybody's had a chance to see those, so we want to make sure those get out to you. These are PDFs that you can fill in when you're in the field to quickly notate dimensions when walking through a project. Just a bonus take-home thing. No extra charge for that. All right, and then we'll get to questions, and then that'll be our day. So I'm going to pop out of PowerPoint here and move into, our PDF viewer. So I've had 3 design guides up, all 3 of them, and we're going to start with the sports design guide. I think this one's been around longer, and you may have already seen this, so you may be familiar with this from a previous webinar we did. There are, at the beginning, some reference distances to help you scale approximately what size product is appropriate to different kinds of venues. That's on this second page. We're mainly going to be looking at the content on each of the typical projects. There are a couple of football fields, a baseball, 2 baseball fields, 3 different soccer fields, and an indoor situation with a basketball court. So these are real common things that we see come across our desks, and we're going to try and distill years and years and literally thousands of projects of experience into these booklets and our discussion today. So let me start with this football field because that's one of the most popular things where you see community products. I'm going to zoom in on this part here. So you'll see in the graphic there's a little center cluster of devices, and at the bottom of the page, there's 3 different ways to fulfill that cluster. You can build that with an R2 max and some supporting R.5s for the home seats. You could build that with standard R2s and standard R.5s in much the same way. And there's ways to expand these designs. And on each page, you're going to see more than one option. So there's ways to work with this. These aren't prescriptions that fit all scenarios. This gives you some basic layouts that have generally been very successful and usually fit this kind of geometry and projection distance and achieve the musicality and the voice projection that's needed for these kinds of projects. This is one of the lowest cost ways to do a football field, is to build the PA on the press box. You zoom in here again to this, and address the local seats with smaller cabinets and larger cabinet plays across to address some visitor seating. Real common way to do it. Not a lot of infrastructure because the head end, all your amplification and mixing is right there in the same building. So it's a cost-effective way to do things. A couple other ways that things are done is to build on light poles and or on the press box structure. We're looking for anything that's tall enough and high enough to locate loudspeakers and cover a large area. Or you can use the scoreboard. Again, that's another structure available. So let's zoom in and take a look at those a little closer. And you'll see on the left side there's a lot of devices shown. The ones marked in yellow could be a system by themselves, where there's some speakers on the light poles playing toward the center, projecting toward the center to address the seating, and then one's over here on the left light pole addressing the visitors. So that's a viable design. In the templates, you're going to see that we show this a few different ways, where we add speakers in the middle here for cases where the seating is wider than what's shown here. This seating does not run the full length of the field, and that does happen a lot of times. And so you have to be careful that the speakers on the light poles don't create an echo for each other when they get further and further apart from each other in a design. And so using speakers in the middle helps to fill in that coverage and bring up some of those time domain effects. So again, at the bottom, there's 3 different ranges of products and combinations to consider. Football scoreboard system. Oops. Here has a mind of its own sometimes. This is an end zone built system, and again, there are multiple options. Basically, just scaling up or down in the product itself. So, moving along to baseball, we have a couple different approaches there also, with speakers centrally located on this, what's called a press box, or remotely located out on towers or lighting towers. The advantage of being on lighting towers is you cover more territory from one position. You do still need to keep in mind that these 2 sources can create an echo effect for some listeners. So you could mix these 2 designs together, or locate all the PA on just one lighting pole and address a lot of territory. Soccer fields don't always have as many structures to work with, unless you're in a place where soccer's a big sport and has all the seating that's typical to football. In that case, I would go look at the football designs to get some ideas as to the way to do it. But if you have a situation where the only things available are the lighting system to host loudspeakers, then there are 3 different ways to get this done, and there's some variations on each, all depending on what you really need to do, who needs to be addressed, where the seating, is the seating defined. We have a lot of times the seating's not defined. Everybody brings their lawn chair and they park where they may, but they still want to hear the game. So we got to figure out how to do that. And the last examples in the sports design guide are the basketball court. There's 2 of these here. The first one and the second one are both distributed designs for the most part. I'm going to zoom in on the first one here. You'll see there are 3 compact R-series cabinets on each side addressing the seats. We find in general that rooms like this that are very reflective benefit from the directionality or the tight coverage pattern that comes with an R-series product. They're also very durable. They're built to withstand outdoor conditions. So indoors they do pretty well dealing with stray basketballs and things like that. Putting them close to the audience here along the sidelines keeps them out of the way of whatever game is being played on the court and shortens up the projection distance, and that helps keep intelligibility higher. In the center of the court here, there's two cabinets, one aimed toward each foul line to provide a little additional coverage to the court area, but it's not a layout you would use if this room had some multi-purpose use. In that case, you actually look at the next one, and in this particular layout, the court has 8 locations with the same product that's addressing the seats, aiming straight down toward the court, much like a ceiling speaker layout or a pendant speaker layout. And this allows you to control this in zones, activate which speakers are needed for different scenarios. It's real common that gymnasiums, particularly in schools, community centers, are used for all kinds of purposes. The bleachers fold up. You can set up seating for different kinds of events. So this is very flexible, very effective. And again, at the bottom, there's a list of different product combinations. It's the same layout. You're just sort of picking a price point or a musicality performance spec to guide which way you're going to take that particular project. The end of each of these design guides has some synopsis pages to show you the basic specs for the products that are presented in the previous pages, so you have a quick reference. If you didn't think to bring spec sheets with you, the basic stuff you need is right here, and then some other things about what's needed for power and processing and wiring and so forth. So that's the sports guide. I'm going to move over to the other 2 guides on presentation spaces and houses of worship. Go back to the first page on each of these so you see the cover shot. The presentation spaces, this is lecture halls, auditoriums, and this sort of environment. The house of worship booklet is a variety of different houses of worship, different religious backgrounds, and different kinds of architecture involved there. In both of these, I want to skip ahead to page 12. And the reason I want to do that on each of these is that if we have some guiding principles when we're laying out systems, we'll be able to solve problems a lot better. We'll ask fewer questions, specific questions, if we have some principles to work with. So on page 12, over here, I'm going to zoom in on the top part of page 12, is some designer tips and tricks. I use these every day. I'll speak for Dave. I presume a lot of the things he encounters, that these are rules of thumb we use all day long, using inverse square law to look at sound pressure to the furthest distance to a listener and the closest distance to a listener, and looking at the ratio of those distances. And that tells us a lot about what's needed for the vertical coverage of the speaker and whether or not the position for the loudspeaker is going to cover evenly. You can push this a little bit. The rule of thumb is 3-to-1, meaning that the furthest listener should be about 3 times the distance as the closest listener. And that's what this little graphic here is demonstrating. But sometimes this ratio can't exist. For some reason, you have a very low ceiling, and the close listeners maybe only 8 or 10 feet away. So that means the farthest listener can only be 20 or 25 feet away. But if the room's 50 feet, then this doesn't work so well, right? We're only going to cover a portion of the room evenly. So then you have to have a strategy to cover the second half of the room with another loudspeaker, or pick something that has really, really high directivity to face the rear. So the directivity pattern can push this so that your ratio could be 5-to-1 or 6-to-1 instead of 3-to-1. But that directivity probably is coming from a line source when you go that far in that direction. So 3-to-1 rule is really, really handy for framing things up. And if you look at the SPL for the D2, which is the further listener, then you'll be able to quickly figure out which loudspeaker you need based on its maximum SPL rating. So that's a quick way to qualify or disqualify a product to be the right choice out of the many, many choices in the catalog. At the bottom of this page, we talk about the horn pattern. People ask this all the time. Quite frankly, they usually ask this question first, and I try to back up and answer the first question about projection distances. The horn pattern is a little less important than getting the 3-to-1 rule correctly. But people ask all the time, how do I get the right horn pattern? So this diagram is showing two ways to pick the right horizontal coverage for a space. At the top of the left of this venue here, there's one speaker with a 90-degree horizontal pattern. There's a lot of speakers that have a 90 by 40 or a 90 by 60 degree horn pattern nominal coverage angle. So if we were to use a speaker like that in this space, where we have a platform here and 3 sections of seating, you can see actually it doesn't cover the room very well. It covers the middle pretty well, and it covers one side. The other side really doesn't hear that speaker very well. If we really want to cover it and drive a stereo sort of environment, even though not all listeners hear stereo, but if we want that spatial effect to come across very well at all, or even just to be able to adjust the level so that the closer and further listeners get the level they need, the right way to do this is to take 2 devices and group them together, one having a narrow horizontal coverage to reach the far side and the other having a wider one for the closer listeners. And then you can adjust the level of those 2 cabinets to do what's called amplitude shading. And so this here tells us a lot about the limits of the horizontal coverage, and all this works also in the vertical. This could be a drawing of the room in the vertical. So the basic angular layout helps. It gets us started. It's not going to show us the same thing as the modeling system will show us when you do simulations, but it does help you quickly figure out whether certain horn patterns are going to work or not. So you can use this horizontal reference for vertical and horizontal patterns. You can use that principle, and then you can use 3-to-1, not just for the projection distance front to back, but for side to side. If we go back, zoom this here, if we were to draw a line here like this one from this cabinet to the far side versus this line to the back, you'll notice that there's this 3-to-1 principle showing up again, and you can use that to help frame up whether you're going to be able to get even coverage. So 2 really handy tips that many designers have used for a long time, and hopefully that will help you answer a lot of the questions that come up as you look through all the other venues in the handbook. So let's rewind to the beginning of the performance design guide and skip ahead past the contents to this gymnatorium space. We jokingly have many versions of the word gymnatorium we pass around the office.
Yeah. And we just had a question on this also. So as I said, stand by. Here it comes.
Yeah. So we get questions about these all the time. You can have all kinds of uses of these spaces. It's a flexible way to use an area that can serve a lot of needs. But how do you do a PA that serves a lot of different scenarios? So in this particular case, we're showing one way to accomplish it. You could do it just like the sports guide did, with distributed arrays down the side for bleacher seating and a distributed system overhead for the court.
There could just as easily be a basketball court shown here and bleachers against one wall also, depending on which end of this gymnatorium, which end the stage is on.
Right.
And I don't know, is it 1 or 2 sound systems, John?
It can be both.
It can?
Right.
What's the budget?
In this case, if the sports part isn't really a spectator function, and it's really more about the audio system being needed for the staging setup here, then you might do something like this, which we can call an exploded array. That doesn't mean we took the speakers and exploded them, but it refers to that terminology when you look at diagrams where you've got a parts diagram and you're trying to assemble something you bought from IKEA, and they have what's called an exploded diagram with all the parts separated from each other. What that means here is The speakers are all pointing back to an imaginary center, if you will. I'm going to zoom in here on this little corner. This is another important principle. Where do I put my speakers? Well, the center of the world, if you will, in one of these rooms is the presenter. So whether this is the school administrator or the pastor or the band or the youth minister or whatever is going on in this space, this is the middle of the attention or the thing that everyone's focusing on in the room. So you want all the loudspeakers to face away from that position and radiate directly out into the space. Given the geometry of this room, it works pretty well actually to get the individual speakers away from each other and cover this in 3 zones. But they all point back to this space, this location. And you'll notice this one's a little bit further away, the left and the right positions. So they would need a little signal delay to really get them to snap together nicely and act like a traditional explode array, which would be in an arc. That's one design principle you'll see repeated a few times here. So in this case, we don't have a list of speakers. There's too many choices. This could be anything in the I series or the Veris series, or even an R series cabinet could be used here. So there's lots of different cabinets that can be used. They can be supported with additional subwoofers and so forth, but here's a good basic layout that's quick and simple to refer to and demonstrate, maybe show to a customer.
So you know, in this example, whether question, since we have this on the screen here, we certainly have a fair number of sports facilities where the stage is at one end.
Yeah, this could be turned to 90 degrees. The stage could be over here in the end zone.
And we could have bleachers down both sides, which kind of leads us back to the sports sound design guide. You're likely, at least for localization, going to want to have a sound system to reinforce a stage and dramatic performances. And then you're going to have a sports system, which its speakers, speaker coverage is, optimized for covering the bleachers. Everybody's kind of hearing everything at time 0, but it's preferably, I'd say, 2 systems most of the time to properly address it and localize the sound if you're having graduation or commencement on the stage. But then, a couple days before, there was a basketball game and the stage curtains were drawn and you're using the overhead system shown in the sports design guide.
Yes, you can certainly blend things together and get combinations that solve a couple of problems. And it's one space but 2 radically different uses. And localization is important, thus this exploded methodology or layout. We'll move along to the next one here, the school auditorium. Now, this is a left-right system. Now, I generally like to advocate something like the presentation auditorium on the right that's going to draw our attention to the center of the platform. But the project on the left doesn't have a real high ceiling. The one on the right doesn't either. So sometimes you've got to use this left-right layout just because of sight lines or camera projection, projector lines.
Projector lines. IMAG.
We don't do video a lot. We do a lot of audio. Anyway, so if one of those projectors is in the way of the audio and you can't put your audio in the center and so forth, you might have to split the system. Or you have some cases where the user really wants to have some sort of spatial effect with stereo. Now remember, stereo means you're right in the middle and you're hearing both sources and you get that phantom image like you listen to on your stereo system at home. But certainly there's some effect from having stereo musical sources played through a left-right system like this. And like we demonstrated earlier about horizontal coverage and the 3-to-1 rule, you see this is actually the same project being shown here. You could supplement this and have both. You could build a center cluster. Here's one shown here. And then have your left-right systems and have what's called an LCR system. And the mix operator can send vocals and voice through the center cluster and presenters who are lecturing through the center cluster and maybe certain instruments, and then put stereo sources through the left-right system. That presumes that the mix operator is more of a technical theater operator, not a volunteer, unless they're a volunteer with a lot of music experience and care to learn the added complexity of that. There's 2 ways to handle that space. The one on the right is much like what we saw earlier with the gymatorium space with an exploded array, 3 cabinets, but in this case located the subwoofers up above on a fly frame. In the I-series there's some fly frames for linking the subwoofer behind the main, and that frees up some floor space. So that's part of what's discussed in this design. By the way, you can take subwoofers on a frame like this and mount them to the I-series flyware to connect them to other types of clusters. It doesn't have to be just a single cabinet with a sub. It can be multiple cabinets with a sub located behind. The next couple here is there's a lecture hall. Okay, very similar things again. There's a left-right method. There's a distributed exploded array for the front and a repeated set of cabinets for the second half of the seating. Both are perfectly valid ways to do it. You might choose one or the other depending on where microphones are going to be placed for conferencing use or for lecture use, and try to create some coverage to the audience and a lower SPL result where the presenter is. So there's a couple reasons why you pick one versus the other. And the next one here is a common community theater, or maybe a high school that has a performing arts stage, or this might even resemble some church environments. So there's a lot of churches that rent the local performing arts space, and it might look a lot like this. This system has multiple features in it. It has 3 main cabinets here that address the majority of the seating in the house. Primarily that cabinet, you can see it in the side view, is addressing the lower seating back toward the under balcony. Then under the balcony is an array of compact cabinets, and above the balcony is an array of compact cabinets to supplement the main system. So every listener in this space, if you look at it from the top view, gets a pretty good centralized focus. They're drawn to what's going on the platform. However, there are some listeners who are sort of left out of that experience, even though they're very close, and that is in the front of the room. You have a lot of listeners who might get the sound from the PA, but the image is wrong in their mind. If they were to close their eyes, they're listening to a voice that's way up over their head, and really they know it's on the platform. So sometimes across the front of the stage are located very compact cabinets that are only meant to address the first few seats, and that's to draw their attention onto the platform and provide the directionality, or what we call localization, to the presenter or performers on the platform.
And that certainly leads to a more engaging experience, for the audience, whether it's a presenter they got their eyes on or they're watching IMAG. But getting that localization psychologically is certainly going to keep your audience more engaged.
Sure. It's what seems like an accessory feature, but a lot of times it's really what makes a system work. Because who paid for the rig? The folks in the front row, right? That's where all your very important people are. That's where all your sponsors and a lot of your important funding comes from folks who like to sit in the front, right?
Yeah.
So let's give them what they paid for. If, quite frankly, you're in a scenario where you're not sure if you can include the stage rail coverage, maybe for some reason a compact I-series is a little higher on cost than they need, it's okay to step down to a lower cost compact cabinet out of the Veris line. It's really more important to get it working so the sound source is in the right place than to agonize over whether or not we're in the right product line.
Yes.
The main PA could be the larger high output cabinets. That's fine. There's plenty of coverage from that, but you're really just trying to psychologically, or with a trick of the mind, to get people to pay attention better with that stage rail system. So last feature in here that's important is to consider where you're putting your subs. It's pretty typical that the subs all get parked in the corner someplace because somebody said they can't be where they want to be. This is where they want to be. They want to be laid out in a spaced fashion across the front. And the reason for that is we don't want anyone sitting right next to a pile of subwoofers receiving all the extra low frequency energy. Common other thing that happens is they wind up in 2 piles, one on each side of the platform. And we get something we call power alley, whereas those big subwoofers producing very low frequencies that have very long wavelengths, some really well in the middle, but not so well on the sides of the room. And so the folks in the middle of the room are getting hammered with more bass than they need, and the folks on the side are not getting the same levels. So if you distribute the bass across the front, you get rid of a lot of those effects. Generally, the spacing here, here's one of those designer tips, the spacing between these locations should be no bigger than the wavelength of your low-pass filter. So if your subwoofer is, for example, passing at 80 hertz down to 30 or 40 hertz, whatever its range is, and you wouldn't want to space them any more than that. Actually, it's great when you can do half of that, but that would be the very most you would do. So again, notice on both of these, there's some product ranges called out, but not specific products, because it applies to everything in the Vera series, everything in the I series, and there are many, many choices throughout those ranges at all kinds of price points. So somebody's probably going to ask the question, I don't know if it's come up yet on the question chat, well, John, how do I know if we're picking Veris or I series in a scenario? Okay, go back to the first thing we did on page 12. Let's run back over here to page 12, right? And look at your distances. Do the inverse square law for the long one. What's the distance that that speaker's got to cover to the further listener? That's how much you're losing over the distance. That's fine. Subtract that from the maximum SPL rating. And that tells you how much you're going to get there. If that's what you want, great. If not, you got to scale up or scale down to a different product. That'll eliminate a lot of confusion when you're sorting through which products you want. And remember, when you get to the end here, some of those specs are right here in the handbook on page 14. All right, we were on the theater, and then the next set here is another page of designer tips and tricks on page 9, and then there's a restaurant lounge laid out. Let's focus on this. Again, this is one of those things you can use on all kinds of projects. This is outlining where you should or shouldn't try to put the loudspeaker based on sight lines. Not so much because we want to see the loudspeaker, but if it's about the loudspeaker being able to project directly all the way to the furthest listener. Now, in this case, you can see two things are going on here. We have this blue line showing the sight line for the occupant in the back row. Well, they don't want to see our loudspeaker. They want to see whatever's going on the stage, and this is the top of the stage opening. So we probably want to keep the speaker above that. Okay. We also want to keep it above the sight line for the balcony viewers. So this is about as low as we can position that speaker and not interrupt sight lines. That'll keep the architect happy, right?
It's important to keep them happy.
Yes, yeah, because they let us put our speakers in their buildings. Then the fill speaker that's going to have to address some listeners back in here for the under balcony. You'll see this is marked with one of the compact I series, an 8-inch two-way. And anywhere in this ceiling surface underneath the balcony is good. You're out of the sight lines, and you're near the area that needs the additional coverage. Scrolling down to the next image, okay, over balcony and under balcony, same thing. You want to keep them out of the dashed orange line. You want to keep them out of the sight lines, okay. And then certainly when you go to set up the system, you're going to put signal delays on the under and over balcony speakers so that the signal arrives at the same time or a little bit late from the main PA. Somebody's going to ask us later, what is a little bit late? Yeah. That might be its own class. Yes. Then the last thing here, we're able to see, if you will, the coverage angles of each of the speakers being used here and where they start to overlap. Remember, sound does not travel in triangles. It's a spherical wave, kind of like you were blowing up a balloon. But this shows you the path of the intended nominal coverage angle, and you can see where the higher directed energy from each speaker is overlapping a little bit. These are the places where you do have to pay attention to the delay adjustments so that the related parts of this system all work together toward the purpose of getting the listener, or the presenter over here, to be perceived as being over there.
I mean, I like to say you shouldn't be able to localize the delay speakers if this is set up properly.
Right. You shouldn't even know they're there.
You shouldn't know they're there.
Right. Yeah. Part of our job in audio is to disappear, right?
Yes.
If we're drawing attention, we did something wrong. So if we can avoid that, we've done our job. Part of our job. Last venue in here is this restaurant lounge area. A lot of times restaurants, of course, get done with some sort of ceiling speaker. Typically ceilings are a little low. If they're high enough to allow projection following that 3-to-1 rule from the platform area, then you could put a compact point source cabinet that's got really good musicality to address the space. Typically the area set up for a stage is barely a stage. You can cram a small band on there and save as many seats as possible to generate revenue, right?
Right.
That's who's paying for it. But typically a small area allocated in the corner or off to the side of the space. And if the ceiling is just high enough, the 3-to-1 rule will let you get away with this. Then you can put up some nice I-series cabinets, even put them in landscape so that they fit tight up against the ceiling structures. You may need to locate some of these compact models throughout the space to supplement that. And that can serve as the BGM system. It can serve as the front of house system. If you wanted to have a distributed layout for general paging use when the band isn't present, that could be another system laid into this. But how many times have you been to a bar or restaurant and it's a nice place, but they've got conventional portable speakers sitting on tripods in the corner, and
they don't even have sandbags on the legs.
Yeah. And so there's sometimes safety concerns, or even just from the presentation side of things. Why can't we hang up some good, high quality musical capable speakers? So that's included here with a couple example products that can be used. Even a 3-way could fit in this scenario. You'll notice this rig right here is actually a 3-way system. This is a 2-way mid-high with real high directivity and a subwoofer flying right behind it. That system would run from 35 hertz to 20,000 hertz with no issues, and probably knock the band over. So there's lots of choices in I-Series to address these kinds of spaces. Nightclubs, performance spaces, I almost feel like I don't have to explain this because we all have seen this to one level or another. Sorry we did Power Alley here, but sometimes that has to happen so everybody can be on the floor up front. Definitely the PA in this case needs to consider coverage right in the center all the way to the back. So there are a pair of cabinets that toe into the middle in this example, a pair of larger cabinets that face to the rear, and some of the larger subs are used in this example. This example uses all I-Series 800 level cabinets, 3-way mains, and subwoofers. The dual 18 IS8 subwoofers are shown here. All right, so we've covered, I think, everything in here that's real key. We've seen that there's some specs at the end of the document. Some of the basic configurations or common configurations for the I-Series flyware are shown, so you can quickly reference that with a customer. We found a lot of folks are able to take these design guides to a site survey or some sort of presentation with an owner and walk through it with them and be able to point to and use some of the artwork to explain what they're trying to accomplish. All right, in the design guide for house worship, you'll see the same tips and tricks page on page 12. The image changes a little bit, but it's the same principles. Don't get surprised there. The same social hall shows up with a different title. Okay, and in this booklet we have several very different kinds of spaces. We have some traditional church spaces like this one here on page 4. This is addressed with distributed Entasis products in the 200 series range. This could be done with the Entasis FR 3-way cabinets. It could be done a couple different ways. The advantage of line sources in a space like this is that they focus all the sound energy down here on the audience level, and much less of it gets to the upper ceiling and so forth. These rooms tend to be very reflective acoustically, and so keeping the sound energy down near the listeners is really important to getting intelligibility so that everyone understands what's going on in the liturgy. There are other environments in churches that can be very traditional structures, like the one on the right, or something that's maybe somewhere in the middle. They're taking a fairly traditional space and using it in a modern way for music purposes. That's sort of what the project on the left represents. So the one on the left has I-series full-range cabinets and a subwoofer just flown left and right of this platform. That gets all the PA, including the subs, up in the air, and allows plenty of space on the front aisle areas for the platform itself, other furniture and decorations and so forth. Sometimes there's just not a lot of space down there for the low frequency support. The structure on the left is a very traditional architecture, a transept floor plan, typically a very reflective space, and in most cases, if not all cases, we're going to use the Entasis FR systems in here because they're able to control the pattern additionally beyond what the Entasis 200 level cabinets can do. There's a mix here, though. There's Entasis FRs addressing the nave portion. Zoom in a bit on this. So Entasis FRs address the middle portion, what's called the nave. And the Entasis 200s, the 212 model, they address the transepts to the side. You'll see, same thing we saw before when we looked at a couple different exploded arrays are put to use here. So a lot of the same methodologies translate to these diamond-shaped floor plans, or what you might call an arch-shaped floor plan for either of these scenarios. Usually, we prefer to use point source speakers in these cases, particularly the one on the right, because the platform is thrust into the listening space. And putting speakers on the back wall can be really tricky. Sometimes we can get away with using line sources there, but it gets tricky to get microphones on the platform to not create feedback difficulties. So you've seen this methodology already in the other booklet, and it just sort of carries through. Just looking at the space from its floor plan and looking at a layout that radiates sound from the presenter area. The facility on the left, this very large worship center, which is also a very reverberant space, generally benefits from Entasis FR arrays, single or double or triple stack tall arrays to get really tight pattern control to cover that area. There's not a lot of places to mount loudspeakers. Sometimes there's a need for some supplemental ones where some listeners are out of line of sight because of the structural posts or pillars. That's usually the direction we go in those environments. And then the one on the right is a very compact little center cluster. So small environment that seats 100, 200 folks and needs good central localization. The direct sound from the presenter, in this case from the clergy, from the pastors, probably addressing the room pretty well, and you're just lifting their voice. And so you need something that, from a directionality standpoint, draws everyone's attention to the center. One main cabinet covers most of the space, and a couple small ones address the listeners who are off to the side so that no one's left out on good coverage. This one, we've got a couple different product levels that are detailed here through the Varus line and even the I-Series line. There's a few different models noted to build that array at a couple different price points. All right, we've seen the social hall, which we don't need to review again. Again, some of the key specs and so forth are here at the end. And some things about amplifiers and wiring, and just good reference material to keep handy when you have these booklets with you. So the second thing we wanted to cover today was, beyond the design guides, to help you as folks in the field to work efficiently, we wanted to give you some materials that you can use directly in EaseFocus. First, I want to show you where do you get EaseFocus. All right. There are two locations to download EaseFocus. There's two versions, by the way. There's version 2.5, which was recently superseded by version 3. We have one speaker product that still works in 2.5. It's going to get upgraded in the near future, but if you need to use it now, this is the version of Focus that you'll need. I can put this URL into the chat, right? Try this.
If you could send to all.
Yep, there we go. All right, hopefully everybody got that. So that'll take you to the download page. There's a link right here to download. Okay.
And EaseFocus 2, say, for a couple more weeks. That's if you're using the Ensys FR series of systems, you'll need to use it in there until we can get our licensing updated.
Mm-hmm. EaseFocus 3 is very similar. Once you've learned one, you can learn the other very quickly. This is the URL to get to the download page for that. Put that into the chat window. Send that out to everyone. The download link is here. It's like any other program. You unzip the installer, run the installer, and set it up. There's also here on the left side, take note, there's some support contact information and so forth to talk to AFMG if you have any technical needs or questions regarding the software. Okay. So that's the software, but then you need data files for each of the speakers. Those data files are called GLL files. We keep them on the website, and they're available from a couple different directions. If you go to the main page at communitypro.com and select Products, you can scroll down to any of the product ranges, and all the things we talked about today are either in the engineering product line, which is the I-Series, the Vera series, the Ensys line. Those are all in the engineered category, or they're in the outdoor loudspeaker systems. All the GLLs available for EaseFocus are in there. We have a regular GLL file for anything in the catalog to be used in the regular full 3D version of Ease. So not to confuse things, but it's important to know that some GLLs are licensed to use in Focus. The factory pays licensing so that you don't have to. And then everything's available for Ease users who have paid their own licensing to use various versions of Ease. So you select one of these ranges. This is the outdoor loudspeakers. Pick the product line. You can select any of these popular products in here. And then on the Downloads tab, there's the Ease Data download. All right. Now when you download that, it's going to pull down for the entire product family. So you don't have to go do this for every single model. It's going to come as a zip file, and it's going to have all the various Ease Data versions there. The other way to get to it is through the menu access here on the top right, which I guess is affectionately called the hamburger.
Cheeseburger, hamburger.
Cheeseburger, hamburger, whatever you want to call that. So there is a downloads choice for current products. All right, this is an easy way to get to all kinds of things. So you pick the product line you're interested in. Maybe you're looking at I-Series, and then hit Apply, and it'll show you everything in the I-Series. You can select any of these, and it'll show you what's available for spec sheets, manuals, etc. And here's the Ease data files. Okay, so all the data you need is on the website. You're going to pull those into your download folder. I'm using Firefox, so if we go into my downloads, you'll see I pulled a few of these down earlier today, and you would unzip it and then go into the folder where it was unzipped. Just unzip one real quick here. Here. There it is. And you'll see that we've got the Focus files are in there, the Ease 3 files, Ease 4 files, and different versions of GLLs available in there. What you'll need to do in Focus is tell Focus where is my file. So, sorry, just a second here. I'm going to unzip these right here. Okay. I'm going to open up my copy of Focus 3. It's going to ask me if I want to sign up for the news, which I don't need at the moment. And then in the File menu, you tell it to import the system definition file. And then you go to the place where you have the file. It used to be you had to manage a special folder. You don't have to do that anymore. You can go into the, I'm sorry, it's on the desktop. There we go. So we would pick one or all of these files and then hit open, and it will import that to the database, and Focus is managing the database in the background for you.
And they'll always be there after you import them once. You don't have to do this repeatedly.
Correct.
As long as your files stay in the same place.
Correct. All right. So that's real briefly where you get your data file. That's usually the first thing that folks are asking when they're new to Focus. We were supposed to ask a poll earlier. I'm curious to do this. How many of you are using EaseFocus on? Send that out to everybody to answer.
Yeah.
We're curious because we know that there's some needs for education on that. We're curious to know what's needed. So answer that when you can there. And let's see. So you have the data file locations on community site, the FMG site. We're going to send you a link that has all the EaseFocus files, so you don't even have to hunt them down. We're going to make this easy for attendees to get a copy of that. We're going to bundle in with that some PDFs that you can use for site surveys. All right.
Okay. Yeah. Looks like 2/3 of people know of you. Know of EaseFocus. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
We're continuing to authorize more products, and with the template projects you'll receive, as we mentioned early on, all these examples that we've been going through in the design reference guides. We have those as EaseFocus templates already populated with community speakers.
I'll bring up one of these here so just see an example. So for each page in the design guide, there is a template that matches it. And I'm sorry, don't need the news right now. And so there's an example of one of them. The speakers already discussed in the design guide are present in here. They're already located. You can begin running mappings, adjust the speaker aiming, move them around to positions that resemble your project, on and on, change the design of everything if you need to. It gives you a really good starting point to demonstrate to folks what you're trying to do in the design guide specific to their project. And that's where the design guide and specific projects are going to connect. You're going to be doing it in the modeling.
I'm going to put out a last call for questions here. We have about 5 minutes left. So last call for questions so that we can get those in. Again, just to touch on EaseFocus, it's a direct SPL design tool. It does not tell you anything about the room acoustics, so we got to be careful there and still use our eyes and our ears in these site surveys, whether we're indoors or outdoors, honestly. But a whole other subject using EaseFocus.
Yeah, not a terribly difficult program. It's
No.
very accessible. Actually, what was done in each of these, if I turn off the mapping real quick, I'll show you. We used basically what's called a rastered image. We used a JPEG from the design guide, laid it in and scaled it in EaseFocus, and then that picture there is simply traced on top of to lay out the different audience areas. So it's pretty quick to be able to lay out a system to get the coverage areas identified, put in some little flags like this one to show us what is the frequency of response at each location. You can get some bar charts, line charts out of it, and so forth. And locate the loudspeakers wherever they need to be. You can change the model for each one of them. And this could be its own discussion, but
easily.
This could go on and on. But mainly, I want you to know this is available. It's pretty quick to learn. Usually, in 15 or 20 minutes, I can get someone up and running, even in a phone discussion, to get around the major features.
We have one more poll question we want to roll out.
We had one earlier.
Times here.
Just curious to know who's already using our design guides, so we'll put that out for everybody to ring in on. Some of these, well, the sports one was released back in the spring.
Yeah.
And the other two have been around since June, so maybe you've already been out there putting these to use. And we're hoping this will expand your capability, having some modeling tools, maybe understanding it better. Maybe digesting this later, you'll have some more questions that come up, and that's what we're around for.
Yeah. No, that's a thing. Yeah, I don't see any more questions coming through. We've just got a couple minutes to wrap this up here.
All right, so last call for questions. Going, gone. Okay, so should questions come up later, that's the email address. It's pretty simple, tagteam@communitypro.com. Has nothing to do with professional wrestling or anything like that. It's just a group of folks that like to work together and help customers out with various complexities in projects. So you're trying to make sense of something, one of these design guides or something else that's come up in your world, and your interaction with customers, we're there for. You can call the factory. We're here 8 to 5 every day, Eastern Time, minus a couple of those important holidays. And tag team will get to any of us. You don't have to worry so much about, am I trying to reach Dave or John or whoever. Just send it to that address, and whoever's first available will get back to you soon.
All right. With that, I want to thank you, John Lufik, for the presentation, and John was instrumental in creating these design reference guides, and we do hope they prove to be useful. Again, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, that tag team at Community Pro address is a great way to get through to us. And we thank you very much for taking time to attend today, and wish you a good day.